Declan Moore, Liam Coyle, and the Kane Brothers, Danny and Reece, built an empire from the shadows of Liverpool, a city where loyalty was bought with blood and betrayal lurked around every corner. From the docks to the nightclubs, they ruled with fear, cunning, and ruthless ambition, turning drugs, money, and violence into a machine that no one dared challenge. But in a world where power is fragile and trust is deadly, even kings can fall, and the streets would never forget the empire they left behind. The late 1990s marked a dark transformation in Liverpool's history. Once a thriving industrial hub filled with shipbuilders, merchants, and dockworkers, the city had fallen into economic despair. Empty warehouses lined the Mersey River, their rusted gates and shattered windows reflecting a community left behind by progress. Where cranes once lifted goods from ships, silence now hung heavy. But beneath that silence, something sinister was growing. The fall of traditional industry created space for a new kind of economy, one that operated in the shadows and fed off desperation. It began quietly, almost invisibly, with a few men looking to make fast money from the city's forgotten dock. The first signs of Liverpool's criminal rebirth came through the flow of cocaine hidden inside cargo containers arriving from South America. Dockworkers, struggling to feed their families, turned a blind eye for a handful of cash. Smugglers soon realized that the Mersey docks were a perfect gateway to Britain's mainland, offering access to major cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and London. A few boxes of white powder could turn into millions once distributed across the country. What started as opportunistic smuggling soon evolved into a network of organized crime, spreading its roots through the city's poorest neighborhoods. At first, police believed these were isolated incidents, just a few gangsters trading drugs on the streets. But what they couldn't see was the formation of something larger, a criminal infrastructure with international connections. Former dockworkers became couriers, nightclub owners turned into distributors, even local businessmen became money launderers. The system worked like a machine, with each piece controlled by someone higher up the chain. Cash flowed through the city like blood through veins, and with it came corruption, addiction, and death. The people of Liverpool began to notice changes. Expensive cars appeared on broken streets. Teenagers who once begged for work suddenly flaunted designer clothes and gold chains. The line between the poor and the powerful blurred as criminal success became a symbol of status. Police patrols increased, but their presence made little difference. The underworld had learned how to hide in plain sight. The city's growing drug problem was treated as a social issue, not an organized one, allowing the gangs to grow stronger under the radar. As the new millennium approached, the balance of power shifted entirely. The old code of respect and silence that once defined the city's working-class culture was replaced by greed and intimidation. A few men began consolidating power, realizing that chaos could be controlled if someone ruled it with an iron hand. Behind locked doors and empty warehouses, deals were made that would change Liverpool forever. Docks became gateways not just for drugs but for weapons and counterfeit money. The underground economy was expanding faster than anyone could stop it. By 2001, Liverpool had unknowingly become one of the most important drug trafficking centers in the United Kingdom. Money from cocaine and heroin built nightclubs, funded local businesses, and even influenced property developments. Every brick of cocaine that entered the city carried blood on it. Yet few dared to speak. Those who did often vanished without explanation. In the shadows of Liverpool's once proud skyline, a new empire was being built. One not of trade or industry but of crime, violence, and greed. It was the beginning of an era that would drag the city into a darkness it would struggle to escape for decades to come. The rise of the Copper Street crew began in the early 2000s. When Liverpool's criminal Underworld was still finding its structure. Amid the chaos and competition for dominance, a man named Declan Moore emerged as a force to be feared. Declan wasn't just another street dealer, he was a strategist, patient and ruthless, with a mind that operated like a businessman's. He started small, running errands for older gang leaders, but within a few years he learned the trade from top to bottom. When his mentors were arrested in a major police sweep, Declan saw his opportunity. he gathered a group of loyal young men from Copper Street, a tough neighborhood known for violence and poverty, and began to build his own criminal enterprise. At first, their operations were simple, distributing drugs across local pubs and clubs, using young runners to avoid direct exposure. But Declan's vision was bigger. He understood that power didn't just come from control, it came from organization. He built a hierarchy within his gang, giving each member specific roles. Some handled distribution, others focused on money laundering, and a select few managed communications with foreign suppliers. Within 2 years, the Copper Street crew had transformed from a small street gang into a disciplined network controlling much of the city's cocaine and heroin trade. Declan ruled through fear, but also through respect. He paid his men well, demanded loyalty, and punished betrayal swiftly and silently. The crew's influence extended far beyond the city's boundaries. Using the docks, Declan established connections with Dutch and Spanish cartels, ensuring a steady flow of narcotics. He invested the profits in legitimate-looking businesses, car dealerships, bars and small shipping companies that served as fronts for laundering dirty money. Police investigations struggled to link him to anything illegal because his public image was clean. He donated to local charities, sponsored youth football teams, and appeared to be a successful entrepreneur. Behind that image, however, was a man who controlled an empire through intimidation and bloodshed. Rival gangs began to take notice. The Copper Street crew's rise threatened established crime families who had dominated Liverpool's underworld for decades. Declan knew they would come for him, so he struck first. One by one, rival operations were dismantled through calculated ambushes and disappearances. Violence became the language of control, and anyone who refused to cooperate was dealt with brutally. The message was simple: Copper Street owned Liverpool's streets. For a while it worked. Declan's name became legend in both fear and admiration. But as power grew, so did greed and envy within the crew itself. Declan's second-in-command, Liam Coyle, began questioning his leadership. Others whispered about Declan keeping too much of the profits. Trust began to erode, and the cracks within the empire slowly widened. The police, though still far behind, started to sense that something larger was at play. Surveillance operations were launched, informants planted, and the first signs of internal betrayal began to appear. Still, Declan believed he was untouchable. He had the money, the men, and the fear of an entire city on his side. Yet beneath the surface, the very foundations of the Copper Street crew were beginning to shake. What Declan didn't know was that the empire he built so carefully was already turning against him, and soon, Liverpool's underworld would be consumed by a war that would leave the streets soaked in blood. By 2005, Liverpool had become a city on edge. The growing dominance of the Copper Street crew had not gone unnoticed by other criminal networks, and the fragile peace that existed between rival gangs began to fracture. The tension finally exploded when a massive shipment of cocaine worth over £10 million vanished at the docks. It was supposed to be a routine transfer. Declan Moore's men were set to collect and distribute the cargo within hours, but when the containers were opened, they were empty. Panic spread through the organization like wildfire. Someone had stolen from the Copper Street crew, and in Liverpool's underworld, that was a death sentence. Declan was convinced that the Edge Hill Syndicate, a powerful rival faction, was behind the theft. The syndicate had long envied Declan's control over the docks, and the missing shipment provided the perfect spark for open warfare. Within days, retribution came. 2 members of the syndicate were found dead in a burned-out van near Toxteth. Both had been shot execution style. The message was clear. Declan wanted revenge, and he would not stop until every last rival paid in blood. But violence only invited more violence. The syndicate retaliated by targeting Declan's couriers, ambushing cars on the motorway and torching safe houses. The murders became almost daily occurrences. Bodies were discovered in alleyways, canals, and abandoned buildings. Ordinary people, trying to live normal lives, found themselves trapped in a city divided by invisible battle lines. Local businesses began closing early, terrified of being caught in the crossfire. Even the police, who had long struggled to infiltrate Liverpool's organized crime network, were overwhelmed by the wave of killings. Each new murder deepened the mystery, as witnesses refused to talk and evidence mysteriously disappeared. The silence was deafening, enforced by fear and enforced by bullets. As the blood war intensified, Declan grew increasingly paranoid. He trusted fewer and fewer people, convinced that traitors existed within his own ranks. His meetings became secretive, his movements unpredictable, but the paranoia came at a cost. His grip on the organization weakened. Liam Coyle, his ambitious second-in-command, began taking more control, making deals and decisions behind Declan's back. Some of the crew began to see Liam as the future, a younger, more calculating leader who could end the chaos and restore order. But Liam had no intention of peace. He saw an opportunity to take everything for himself. Meanwhile, law enforcement began piecing together fragments of information. Surveillance operations revealed coded messages, secret drop points, and offshore accounts. Yet every time the police prepared a raid, the targets seemed to vanish just hours beforehand. Someone inside the system was feeding the gang's information, ensuring the blood war continued unchecked. The city had become a chessboard, with every move calculated, every death a message. By winter, Liverpool's streets had turned cold and silent. The once bustling nightlife districts became ghost towns, and fear hung in the air like smoke. Declan Moore, once untouchable, was now a hunted man, not just by the police, but by his own creation. The missing shipment had unleashed more than violence. It had shattered the delicate balance of power that kept Liverpool's criminal underworld alive. What began as a theft had turned into an all-out war for control, one that would soon consume everyone involved. Declan Moore's empire began to crumble from within long before he realized it. The blood war that had erupted over the missing shipment left his organization fractured and exhausted. His once loyal men whispered behind his back, blaming his paranoia and rash decisions for their growing losses. The money that once flowed endlessly through the Copper Street crew's accounts was now bleeding away, spent on bribes, payoffs, and the constant cost of war. Declan's paranoia deepened with every passing day. He stopped trusting his lieutenants, demanded lie detector tests, and even began tailing his own men. The empire he had built on fear was now consuming itself from the inside. Liam Coyle watched all of this unfold with quiet calculation. For years he had been Declan's right hand, respected, reliable, and always 2 steps ahead. But loyalty had its limits. Liam had grown tired of Declan's obsession with control and his increasingly erratic behavior. While Declan was busy hunting ghosts, Liam was forging new alliances in the shadows. He met secretly with leaders of the Edge Hill Syndicate, the very rivals who had once tried to destroy them. The deal was simple. Together they would remove Declan from power. In return, Liam would take over the Copper Street crew and merge the operations, creating one unstoppable empire. The betrayal unfolded slowly, disguised as a business opportunity. Liam convinced Declan that a new supplier from Rotterdam wanted to establish a direct route through Liverpool. The shipment was worth millions, and Declan, desperate to recover his lost fortune, took the bait. On the night of the exchange, he arrived at an abandoned warehouse near the docks with a small crew. Everything seemed routine until the lights went out. Within seconds, gunfire erupted. Declan's men fell one by one in the chaos. Declan himself was shot twice, but managed to crawl to safety, vanishing into the darkness as his empire burned behind him. The police arrived hours later, finding only bodies, bullet casings, and blood-soaked concrete. News of Declan's fall spread quickly through Liverpool's underworld. Some claimed he had fled the country, others whispered he was hiding in Ireland or Spain. A few believed he was already dead, buried beneath the docks that had once made him rich. Without their leader, the Copper Street crew splintered. Some members joined Liam's new syndicate, while others were hunted down for refusing to switch sides. What had once been a unified organization now resembled a graveyard of broken loyalties and unburied secrets. The police took advantage of the chaos, launching a series of raids across the city. Drug houses were torched, accounts were frozen, and minor players were arrested. But the real power remained untouched. Liam Coyle stepped into Declan's shadow, presenting himself as the man who could restore order to Liverpool's underworld. To the outside world, the violence seemed to fade. To those who knew better, it was only changing shape. Declan's fall was not the end. It was the beginning of a new era, one ruled by a younger, smarter, and far more dangerous generation. The streets had claimed one king, only to crown another. When Declan Moore vanished, the void he left behind did not last long. From the ashes of the Copper Street crew, two brothers rose to power, Danny and Reece Kane. They had started as errand boys in Declan's network, moving small packages, collecting payments, and watching how the empire operated from the inside. Both had grown up in poverty on the rough estates of North Liverpool, where survival meant adapting fast and trusting no one. While most saw Declan's downfall as a warning, the Kane brothers saw it as an opportunity. They were young, ambitious, and clever enough to learn from the mistakes that had destroyed their predecessor. The Kane brothers began by uniting the scattered remnants of the Copper Street crew. They approached Declan's old lieutenants with calm persuasion instead of threats, offering them money, protection, and stability in exchange for loyalty. Those who refused to join were quietly removed. Some fled the city, others disappeared entirely. Within months, the brothers had restructured Liverpool's underworld with military precision. Danny, the elder, handled the business side, money laundering, real estate investments, and offshore accounts, while Reece managed operations on the street. Together, they built something stronger than a gang. They built an organization that operated like a corporation. Unlike Declan, the Kane brothers avoided open violence. They used technology to conceal their movements, encrypted phones, anonymous bank transfers, and layers of intermediaries who never knew the full picture. Their shipments arrived hidden inside legitimate cargo containers marked as fruit, coffee, medical supplies. By the time authorities traced anything suspicious, the drugs had already been moved and sold. Their profits flowed into construction projects, luxury car rentals, and cryptocurrency portfolios. On paper, everything looked clean. In reality, Liverpool had never been more deeply entangled in the drug trade. The brothers also knew the power of image. They maintained a public facade of success, respectable businessmen who sponsored charities and youth programs. Reece was often seen at exclusive events, rubbing shoulders with wealthy investors, while Danny built connections with foreign suppliers and financial brokers in Dubai and Amsterdam. Behind their calm and polished exteriors, however, was the same cold ruthlessness that had defined every generation of Liverpool's criminal elite. Betrayal, even at the smallest level, was met with swift and brutal retribution. Their influence spread beyond Liverpool, reaching Manchester, Birmingham, and even into London. The Kane brothers created a nationwide distribution network that rivaled any cartel operating in Europe. They worked with Albanian traffickers and Irish smugglers, ensuring that their supply never stopped. Every major port in the UK became part of their system, linked by money and intimidation. But as their empire grew, so did their differences. Danny, focused on business and stability, wanted to keep operations discreet and profitable. Reece, younger and more impulsive, craved power and recognition. He enjoyed the thrill, the control, and the fear his name inspired. The brothers' contrasting visions created silent tension within their organization. While outwardly united, they were slowly drifting apart. By 2015, the Kane brothers had become legends, admired, feared, and envied. Liverpool's streets no longer whispered Declan Moore's name. They now spoke of the Kanes, the brothers who turned crime into an empire, and blood money into respectability. But beneath the illusion of success, the same forces that destroyed those before them were beginning to stir. Ambition had built their empire, but it was also the seed that would one day tear it apart. As the Kane brothers solidified their control over Liverpool, their influence began to stretch far beyond the streets. Money was no longer just a tool for survival or intimidation. It had become the key to manipulating entire systems. The brothers understood that true power came not from fear alone, but from the ability to control the very institutions meant to stop them. Police officers, customs agents, and even local politicians slowly fell under their sway. Bribes were carefully calculated, favors were exchanged under the table, and threats were veiled in politeness. Slowly, the line between law and crime blurred, until it became nearly invisible. Corruption allowed the Kanes to operate with impunity. Police investigations stalled mysteriously, key evidence disappeared, and informants vanished under suspicious circumstances. Some officers turned a blind eye, motivated by money, loyalty, or fear. Others who resisted were quickly removed, either through career sabotage or more violent methods. The brothers had mastered the art of invisible control. Liverpool's crime wave was no longer just about street violence. It had become a sophisticated network where illicit profits flowed through banks, businesses, and property developments, often appearing perfectly legitimate on paper. Journalists who attempted to expose the truth learned quickly that curiosity could be deadly. Investigative reporters received anonymous threats, cars were tampered with, and some simply vanished. Even the media, normally a watchdog of society, found itself powerless against the Kanes' intricate web of influence. Information was currency, and the brothers controlled it ruthlessly. They planted false stories, manipulated sources, and cultivated a reputation that protected them from scrutiny. Outsiders could see the wealth, the luxury cars, and the high-end properties, but they could never grasp the invisible power that dictated the movement of millions behind closed doors. Despite their outwardly calm and polished appearances, tension simmered within the empire. The brothers had divided responsibilities carefully. Danny handled finance, Reece managed operations, but ambition is rarely satisfied with a partner. Reece, impatient and hungry for complete control, began maneuvering behind Danny's back. He developed secret alliances with foreign suppliers, cut deals that bypassed his brother, and quietly tested loyalties among the crew. Danny, cautious and methodical, noticed the shifts but underestimated the speed at which Reece was consolidating power. The cracks that had destroyed previous empires were forming again, invisible to most but deadly in their potential. The city itself had become a reflection of the empire's reach. Liverpool's docks, once abandoned and decaying, were now humming with activity, both legal and illegal. Nightclubs, restaurants, and luxury apartments were fronts for laundering drug money. Even the property market had been subtly infiltrated, with the Kanes purchasing, renovating, and selling prime locations to mask illicit gains. Ordinary citizens lived unaware of the invisible system that directed their city's rhythm. Taxis, deliveries, and shipments all moved along paths dictated by the brothers. By 2018, Liverpool's underworld was unlike anything the city had ever seen. Violence remained, but it was often invisible to the public eye, replaced by threats, manipulation, and calculated intimidation. The Kane brothers had built a network so sophisticated that even law enforcement struggled to trace the flow of money or anticipate moves. The city had become a chessboard, with every pawn, knight, and rook manipulated with careful precision. Yet, despite their power and cunning, the seeds of betrayal and ambition had already begun to grow. The brothers' empire, formidable and untouchable in appearance, was quietly approaching a moment of reckoning that would test the limits of their control and reshape Liverpool forever. Tension between the Kane brothers had been building for years, but by 2019 it reached a boiling point. Reece, the younger and more impulsive of the two, had grown impatient with Danny's careful, calculated approach. While Danny focused on maintaining stability and avoiding unnecessary attention, Reece craved expansion and visibility, pushing deals that could potentially expose them to law enforcement. He believed that Danny was holding the empire back, content to settle for steady profits rather than ultimate control. Reece began quietly maneuvering behind his brother's back, meeting with foreign cartels and cutting secret deals without Danny's knowledge. Danny, always cautious, started noticing subtle discrepancies. Shipments that had once been handled jointly were rerouted. Payments arrived without explanation, and trusted lieutenants began reporting directly to Reece. The signs of betrayal were clear, but Danny hesitated. He still trusted the bond of blood, believing that a brother would not risk the empire for personal gain. That miscalculation would prove fatal. Reece had already anticipated Danny's loyalty and used it to his advantage. He deliberately provoked minor incidents, creating situations where Danny's hesitation could be interpreted as weakness. By controlling the narrative within the gang, Reece positioned himself as the true visionary, capable of leading the empire into new territories. The betrayal reached its climax during a high-stakes shipment of cocaine bound for Europe. Reece orchestrated the entire operation, diverting a significant portion of the drugs and profits into his personal network. Danny, unaware of the full scope, discovered the scheme only after the shipment had left Liverpool. Furious, he confronted Reece indirectly, leaking details to law enforcement in an attempt to eliminate his brother without appearing complicit. The plan seemed clever. By using authorities to strike at Reece, Danny could remain above suspicion while reclaiming control of the empire. What Danny did not anticipate was that Reece had already foreseen this possibility. The younger brother had inserted his own loyalists into every critical point of the organization, including people who could intercept leaks and manipulate law enforcement operations. When the police raid occurred, Danny was caught in a trap. What appeared to the public as a gang shootout was, in reality, the final act of Reece's strategy. Danny was killed, his body never fully recovered, leaving only rumors and whispers about the betrayal. With Danny eliminated, Reece emerged as the undisputed leader of Liverpool's criminal empire. He consolidated control swiftly, reassigning lieutenants, securing international connections, and ensuring loyalty through a combination of fear and wealth. The streets that had once whispered Danny's name now trembled at Reece's. He was younger, sharper, and more ruthless than anyone before him, and the empire grew in both size and sophistication under his singular leadership. Yet Reece's victory was not without consequence. The very tactics that secured his power also sowed distrust among his remaining allies. While outwardly loyal, many began quietly questioning his decisions, remembering how quickly betrayal had removed Danny from the game. The police, too, were more determined than ever, now aware that the empire had a single leader whose mistakes could be exploited. Reece ruled with power and precision, but the shadows around him grew darker, and the foundations of his empire built on loyalty, fear, and blood were already beginning to show cracks. In the world of Liverpool's criminal elite, absolute power came at a cost, and even kings could fall. By 2020, Reece Kane's empire seemed untouchable, a sprawling network that stretched from Liverpool's docks to ports across Europe. Under his leadership, the organization had reached the height of sophistication, blending legitimate business with illicit operations in a seamless web of control. Ships carrying cocaine, heroin, and other contraband moved under layers of false documentation. Offshore accounts concealed millions, while luxury properties, construction firms, and cryptocurrency investments laundered dirty money with ease. Reece appeared untouchable, a shadow king whose name was spoken in hushed tones across the criminal world. Yet the higher he climbed, the more vulnerable he became. The first cracks appeared from inside. Years of secrecy and betrayal had created tension among his lieutenants. Loyalists who once feared him now questioned his decisions, remembering the swift downfall of his brother Danny. Small errors, miscommunications, unexplained losses, suspicious shipments began to accumulate. Even the most disciplined network could not remain invisible forever. Law enforcement had been patient, meticulously collecting evidence, mapping connections, and planting informants in critical positions. What Reece had considered perfect control slowly became a trap he could not see. The turning point came with an operation codenamed Operation Kraken, a coordinated international sting involving UK police, Europol, and Interpol. Months of surveillance revealed the full extent of Liverpool's Dark Empire. The routes, the accounts, the front businesses, and the key players. Every encrypted message was decrypted, every transaction traced. Reece had built walls of deception around himself, but the authorities were breaking them piece by piece. The first arrests were made quietly, taking out mid-level managers who had begun questioning his authority, while evidence of offshore laundering was seized. Reece remained unaware, believing his empire was as secure as ever. Then came the night of the raid. Coordinated teams stormed warehouses, offices, and luxury apartments. Containers were intercepted at the docks. Millions in cash, drugs, and assets were confiscated. Employees loyal to Reece were caught in the chaos. Some arrested, some forced to turn informant to save themselves. Reece himself attempted to flee to Morocco, leaving behind a city that had been under his control for over a decade. His plans were foiled when his personal accountant, a man he had trusted completely, betrayed him, providing authorities with real-time locations and detailed financial records. Reece was captured at a small private airstrip, taken into custody without resistance. The empire that had once ruled Liverpool was dismantled in a matter of weeks. The streets that had whispered the names of kings and criminals fell silent. The docks emptied of the constant hum of smuggling operations. Many of the empire's associates faced long prison sentences, while assets seized in the raid were used to fund community projects and compensate victims of the city's drug crisis. For the public, it was a shocking revelation of how deeply crime had infiltrated the city. But for those who had lived within the empire, it was only the surface of a world built on fear, manipulation, and blood money. Yet even with Reece behind bars, the legacy of the empire remained. Unsolved murders, missing millions, and hidden caches of drugs and cash continued to haunt Liverpool. The city had been permanently scarred by the rise and fall of a criminal dynasty that had thrived in the shadows for decades. The story of Declan Moore, the Kane Brothers, and the countless others who played roles in Liverpool's Dark Empire served as a chilling reminder. Even when the king falls, the ghosts of his empire linger, and the city's underworld is never truly silent.